Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a field-forward podcast. I'm David Geiger, your host. Today on Farm Here Daily, we're going to cover all things dairy, challenges and successes with Jennifer Bentley, ISU Extension Specialist and fellow podcaster. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, making sure folks are informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining us on Farm Here Daily, we have Jennifer Bentley. She is an Extension Dairy Specialist for Iowa State University and also the host of Dairy News and Views podcast. And I'm glad to have Jennifer on today, fellow podcaster. Appreciate your time today, Jennifer. What's going on? And tell me a little bit more about your podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate you inviting me to your podcast as well. And yeah, we do a podcast. It's called Dairy News and Views from ISU, and I actually started that during COVID when we couldn't get out to producers. We thought, well, this is a perfect time to try it out, and we've continued it since then. Just trying to introduce timely topics. You know, producers are out in the field and listening in their trucks and tractors, and so this was just a great way to get the information out. And so, anytime there's something timely that we want to put out, that's usually when we do that.
Dairy News and Views. This seems like a very broad scope of the industry. Is it pretty much covering all sorts of topics or all topics when it comes to dairy?
I would say all sorts of topics. We sometimes will introduce some of the programming that we're doing for the year if we have an upcoming event that we want to push out. Other times, like today, we're going to be recording with our extension forage specialist on the tassel wrapping that's happening with corn right now. So, that's kind of a hot something that's happening out in the field, right? So we want to get it out there. When we had the high path avian influenza happening, and we wanted to, let people know what it was, how it was transmitting, or how it was affecting herds. That was a way we could get that information out. We also have producers on the podcast talking about their dairy herd management practices. So we try to invite those a couple times a year, and we highlight, just other extension professionals too, right? So they're doing a lot of research and things happening out in the other parts of the world. So we want to invite them and get their current practices out to our producers as well.
I think a big part of why I wanted to establish just all you talk about is because that means you, not only within your own field of study as an extension dairy specialist, but also as a podcaster who talks to many different people about the industry, you have a wide range of knowledge on this. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the dairy industry, especially in the Midwest, and what are the big issues going on. What do you view as some important notes to make about the state of Midwest dairy?
Sure. Well, if you take a look at Midwest dairies right now, I think we're in I would say a mode of expansion. We're seeing a lot of growth along the northwest Iowa side of the state, along that I-29 corridor. South Dakota is growing in cow numbers. And I think that has a lot to do with increased capacity. There's some processors out there either adding on to current facilities or updating their facilities, or there's some new plants coming online that, can take more milk. So when we need more milk in the processing plant, that means we need more cows. So that's been pretty neat to see out in the industry. As a plug, there's a new processing going on in Iowa. So we have the Daisy plant being built in Boone, Iowa. So that's going to be fun to see how that evolves over time and how much milk gets sent there. So that's something new for us in Iowa. But with expansion, that also comes some issues too, right? So we have to balance milk inventory with milk pricing, as well as what's going on with commodity pricing and all their other expenses. So, right now, milk prices are maybe not the highest we've seen in the last couple of years. So they're trending a little bit down. So we're probably in that 17 and a half to about 19 and a half dollars per hundredweight of milk. And so margins become tighter. And so dealing with how do we decrease feed costs, decrease other expenses on the farm. Labor is a huge issue on farms, and I see that a lot as far as people are increasing herd size or doing something new on their farm. It takes labor, and there's always a shortage of labor. So I think those are some of the things that we're seeing right now.
I absolutely want to touch on labor, but before I get to that, I want to ask about the expansion side because that's very exciting. But I also recall, especially in Iowa, it was just a few years ago, I recall concerns of having to dump milk because it just was not able to meet demand. There was too much milk in the supply at the time. What's changed?
Yeah, and we didn't. I guess we didn't see a major milk dump in Iowa. There was
Right,
other states. Yeah,
just
yeah,
concerns
just
that that might have
concerns,
to be
right? And that
happening.
was right around COVID time too. And so when you think about when everything was shut down, schools weren't taking milk, right? So you think milk is a big thing in our school systems, and so when we didn't have that milk going there, a lot of restaurants were closed. So all our pizza joints weren't utilizing as much cheese. Think about all those products that go into the restaurants, and so um, a lot of that uh, happened during that time. But we don't see that right now as far as a concern um, in that respect, I guess. We're finding ways to utilize milk products, and there's always research and innovation happening on how we can utilize milk. There's a lot of demand for protein, and so when we take a look at how milk can be turned into high value protein products, there's a lot of things that we can do to entice consumers to consume milk.
Moving back to the labor side, that was actually your most recent episode on Dairy News and Views. You talked about the labor side, some concerns, some issues, what's going on in that part of the dairy industry. So, what was your takeaway when you were talking to some experts and getting some more details about labor in dairy?
Yeah, we had Miguel Rangel with Optimum Consulting on our podcast. We've known him for a while. He was a former herd manager at the ISU Dairy and went out and started his own consulting business, but really does a good job of connecting producers with labor. And I think one of the biggest takeaways I got from that podcast was retention and how we can, if we find valuable employees, how do we keep them on the farm? Because they can be pulled in all kinds of different directions. They can go work someplace where maybe there's better working conditions, right? And so how do we make it enticing for people to stay if we find that they are good employees and do a good job on the farm. There's incentives, so we can, provide different types of benefits to them, whether that's housing, having different celebrations for different ethnic groups, recognizing different cultures and just being aware of their family times as well. I think that all adds value to how we keep our employees on the farm.
That leads to another aspect of the dairy industry, and that is automation. I remember it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was introduced for the first time, and I'm sure it's been around a little longer, to some of the Lely self milking stations
Yeah.
that they have, which is super cool, but also a reduction of that need of labor. Is that still something that's a little too expensive to be out of the hands of your average dairy producer? Or are we seeing more producers move towards automating and reducing their labor force?
I think we're still seeing a growth in automation with dairies. As yes, so it's kind of like putting I guess I would say your labor, you're investing in your labor right away, right? So with the automation robot systems, generally they take about 7 to 10 years to pay that off. But so you're kind of investing in that labor up front. And I think that's how people are maybe looking at that as well as some of the additional benefits, not just somebody's milking the cows, right? Or the robots milking the cows, but they may see increased milk production. They can get other parameters like activity. They can detect cows that are sick earlier. So there's a lot of other things besides just getting the cow milk that they're benefiting from, and that's really turning that technology into something that can be profitable for their dairy as well. So yeah, it's increased. I think we had a field day in 2010 would have been our first robot in Iowa, and it's I think we've probably now we have about 10 to 15% of our herds are milking with robots.
10 to 15%, you said?
Yep. Yep.
Wow. Wow. You said, and this may be a bit of a tangent, but you said that it can take 10 years or so to pay it off. And I just think of technology nowadays, and it doesn't really seem to be built to last that long on your average, your phone or your computer or even cars to an extent. Are we seeing, if you've been looking at these automated independent stations going on for the last 15 years, are we seeing kind of a longevity to these? Or, and this isn't to call out any company in particular,
Hmm.
this just that's a lot of hard labor for a machine to take with dealing with livestock for 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the majority are still on dairies if they install the robotic milking systems. The thing that they may update is the software continually needs to be updated every few years. And, once it reaches a certain point, there might be some upgrades that they might have to do and renovation to upgrade, you know, just even the stalls. We've learned so much about robotic technology that how we make our cows more comfortable coming into the robots, some of those changes that they want to make because they're going to know that there's some improved health benefits to the cow.
Not to mention to make it so there's not certain cheeky cows trying to get in multiple times to get the
Yeah.
snack.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of fun especially jerseys for some reason. You can watch them and they just go round and round. Like they think they're going to get a treat.
Hey, Jennifer, hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment, but first we're going to take a look at the marketplace on Farm Here Daily. And there was a mixed close to the Thursday trading session. September corn 2.25 cents higher, 3.94. December rising a penny and a half at 4.13 3/4. Soybeans in August 6 cents down, 9.61 3/4, with September down 6.25, 9.69 1/2. Soybean meal in August $1.10 a ton in the green at $261.80. September wheat half a penny lower, 5.23 1/4, with December falling a penny and 3/4, 5.42 1/2. In livestock market close for Thursday, August live cattle down $5.30 a hundredweight, $227.77. October $6.57 weaker, $223.15. Feeder cattle in August $7.57 a hundredweight down, $331.37. With September $8.20 lower, $331.55. Lean hogs in August 10 cents a hundredweight more, $107.12, with October rising 37 cents at $89.57 a hundredweight. That is the Thursday market close. This is Farm Here Daily. I want to go over another aspect because we talked about some of the podcast work you've done, the people you've talked to, but you are also an extension dairy specialist for Iowa State University, and you guys are working on a survey. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. Well, every 5 to 8 years, we do a dairy industry survey. So this goes out to all the producers in the state of Iowa. There's a licensed dairy producer list. And so we've come up with a set of questions. I would say this last survey, we've significantly reduced the number of questions because we know that there's survey fatigue. People they get a lot of surveys, right? So we want to make sure that we're capturing the information that we need in more of a timely fashion for them to want to fill it out. So this year we got about a 40% response rate, which we feel is really good when you think about survey responses. And we asked them questions about what they're doing on their farms. Are they looking at making any changes? What are concerns with their farming operation? and what can Extension do to provide programming in the next couple of years, because we use this survey to write grants. So if we're looking at some newer education, we have this information to say, hey, farmers are looking at doing this, whether it's building robotic dairies or automatic calf feeders. If we see that trend within that survey, that leverages us to be able to provide some uh, information in those grants to get that funding to do more education.
Right. The more information you have allows you to better serve the community by knowing what they want to learn more about.
Mhm.
What is an example of that? What's something that you weren't expecting to have to look into or research in the last 10 years that you found the study that a lot of dairy producers were really interested in?
Well, I think from the last few surveys that we've done, that beef on dairy is something that really rose to the top this year
Right.
as compared. I don't think I saw it in any of the surveys in the previous years that we did this. And so that's something that we're focusing on as the extension dairy team, working with our beef team as well to collaborate on, how producers are breeding for beef on dairy, how they're marketing, how they're feeding cattle, and what's the impact on their dairy as far as profitability. So that's kind of something that stood out. Something that we see, I would say, every time in our survey has been farm transition. Although I feel like it was a little bit stronger in this survey, and I think as we move into the next couple of years, there's real concern about future generations and farm transition, and so that's something that we're looking at um, offering this winter. We're collaborating with our farm extension specialist, Joseph Lensing, to do a very dairy specific farm transition workshop. So, really getting into the nuts and bolts of how people do this. How do we provide some communication tools for families that are looking into farm transition? Because we want farms to continue, right? And so they need the tools uh, to do that. And so hopefully we can provide some education that way.
When you're talking about farm transitioning, is that something that you've seen previously, or maybe in a more modern sense of the younger generation getting into the dairy side first before getting into other aspects of farming? Or is dairy a bit of a too tough market to just get into?
It's definitely a challenge to get into the dairy industry because of the high investment, right? You think about the cows, the land, the facilities, the labor that it takes to run the dairy operation. But I also think there's ways that we can help the younger generation work into these farms. Um, and that might be looking at being creative as far as, how do I fit into the farm? Maybe I'm not. Um, on the farm every day, but maybe I have some custom harvesting business that I do as part of the dairy, or maybe I want to do some on-farm processing, and that's a way for me to uh, bring value back to the dairy. Or if maybe I'm gonna raise all the beef on dairy calves, and that's kind of the niche. So I think finding some of these niche markets for some of the younger generation to add value to what they can bring back to the dairy. We also have some producers that maybe they didn't even come from a dairy farm and want to get into dairying, right? So um, I know my colleague Larry Tranel has worked with a few producers on what we call share milking, and that allows a younger person that maybe doesn't have quite the capital investment to get on the farm, to invest a little bit into the farm, maybe not have quite all the expenses, but provide the labor to work on that dairy, and maybe there's some transition there that could happen with a share milking contract.
Share milking. That sounds really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So share milking, I mean, it's very, I guess, specific to each farm, right? Depending on how it's set up. But um, let's say somebody is getting into the farm and they're going to provide, uh, let's say, 75% of the labor, and maybe they only pay for 50% of the cost or the expenses. And then there's a certain percentage of the milk check that they would get from that. So it's kind of all based on different inputs for each dairy, depending on what they have. We're actually doing a pasture walk coming up on September 3rd. It's actually at Andy Schaefer's farm, and he is doing share milking right now. And so that's going to be one of our topics that we're going to cover is how they're developing that plan so that that younger generation that it's not a family member, right? So they're bringing in somebody that's non-family and how they're developing that share milking program.
I want to touch on the economy side and consumer side of the dairy industry. And first, with technology, as we discussed, it allows some pretty amazing things like having self milking stations, but it also has allowed for transfer of product, preservation, and the ability to be a little bit more widespread when it comes to where your milk can go. Is there still a significant economic advantage for a dairy to be closer to an urban population than there is for a dairy that is, maybe in northeastern Iowa or northwestern Iowa that may have a bit of a drive to go before they get to a big processor?
Yeah, I think hauling costs, milk hauling costs is one of the concerns that we saw in our survey was, yeah, if we're further away from where we're processing milk, it makes it more expensive to get that milk to the processor, right? So maybe it's not necessarily the urban part of it, but just where those processing centers are and to get the milk there. Um, and I think that's where we've seen some on-farm processing start to happen, particularly in Iowa. We have quite a few farmers that are kind of taking it out on their own, right? They're doing all the dairy herd management work, and they're also doing the on-farm processing, marketing their own milk, making cheeses, ice cream, different products that they're um, kind of set up more locally to distribute and market.
On a similar note, I wanted to go over the consumer side of things. And something I think of pretty frequently, especially on social media, you'll hear people talking about lactose intolerance and people who maybe can't enjoy milk to the extent of other people. Thankfully, I'm not one of those people. I can enjoy all the milk and cheese I want. Uh, are you seeing any consumer changes or consumer habits when it comes to milk consumption? And does that impact how dairy producers work and market their products?
I think it definitely does. If you think about, I just think about my own family growing up. We sat down and had a bowl of cereal every morning, right? So you poured your milk into your bowl of cereal. And now you think about how many families actually sit down and have cereal together. So that milk consumption has definitely decreased, that just actual true milk consumption. But I think we've come a long ways in finding ways of different products that make it more convenient for people to consume milk. So you think about yogurt, cottage cheese, those high protein products that people really value, and something that's quick for them to grab or stick in their coolers if they're going to a baseball game. The quick yogurts or um, things like that that can still provide a good nutritional package for their families. So I think we're seeing a shift in how we market the products to tailor to the even the younger generation of how we consume products, right? So, yeah, you mentioned lactose intolerance. So, there are products that they can still consume even if they are lactose intolerant. There's products that take the lactose out of the milk, so it's ultra filtered, and so it makes it more digestible for them. So it's just a matter of you know researching it a little bit and finding those products that are out there that they can take they can consume and learn that they can still get nutrition from their dairy products.
Wow, I had not heard of that. I suppose that's because I don't have lactose intolerance. This is
Yep.
not going to be news for most people who have to deal with that. But for folks like me, is that a more recent development, or has that been a niche market for a bit?
I would say in the last couple years, it's really come onto the market, and I've seen other more than just one processor start to get into that ultra filtered processing where they can reduce the amount of lactose in the milk and make it more digestible for people.
I'm going to leave on just one last question. As someone who is in the industry, talks to a lot of people in the industry, and is a general scientist when it comes to what's going on with dairy, what do you view as one of the biggest challenges over the next few years in the dairy industry? And then on the same point, what would you see as a huge success for dairy producers?
Yeah, I think just the challenges would be in markets where we see this, high and low milk price. How do we manage our margins so that we can produce high quality milk, a lot of milk, and still make a profit and keep those family farms operating? If you look at Iowa, we're 99% family owned, so our farms are relying on their families to continue the farm into the next generation, and so that's a challenge. How do we keep entice those younger generation to get to be on the farm? But I also think there's a lot of benefit to having dairy in our local communities. We did a economic study a few years ago looking at the economic impact of one cow in our communities, and one cow generates about $24,000 of economic impact. So you think about the jobs that it creates. So for every 10 cows, it creates one job. So we create a lot of jobs through the dairy industry, whether that's people working on the farm, working in manufacturing, nutritionists, veterinarians, feed co-ops, all those that take, it takes a lot of people to manage the dairy, not just on the farm but outside of the farm too. And then you think the local impact of keeping those families in our local communities, so your school systems, your churches, your grocery stores, all those get impacted by keeping family dairies in your communities.
Jennifer Bentley is an extension dairy specialist for Iowa State University, also a host of Dairy News and Views podcast over there at ISU. Jennifer, thank you so much for your time joining me on Farm Here Daily.
Well, thanks for having me.
This is Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. Thank you again so much for listening. And if you liked it, please follow and like our podcast and check out our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports, as well as WHO TV Channel 13 every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and we'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.